Hello, and thank you for joining us today on LinkedIn Live. My name is David Schneider. I am the marketing manager for Insight Public Sector, and I'll be your host today. Joining me are Brian Louderback. Brian is our regional sales director covering mostly the western half of the United States. Brian has been with us for over 20 years now, focused exclusively on state, local, and educational markets. Recently, Brian authored an article entitled 4 Ways to Prepare for Back to School in 2020 for our tech journal, and we'll be talking about that a little bit today as well. Also joining me is Darak Weaver, a senior account executive with Insight Public Sector. After serving in the Navy, Brian worked for the Brownsville Independent School District for over 12 years as a teacher, administrator, and IT director. He has been with Insight Public Sector for 19 years now, also focused on the public sector and education. So thank you both for being with us today and sharing your thoughts.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Dave.
Our topic today is certainly on everyone's mind, and that is a return to school. I myself was recently on a video call with my son's school district to discuss plans for the upcoming school year. And like a lot of school districts across the United States, they are considering several different options based on what the regulations will be at the time that classes begin. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about how schools can prepare for whatever comes next. How are they going to reimagine that classroom experience using technology? How do we return to classes in a safe and healthy way? And how do we deliver a quality educational experience? So I wanted to start by looking at the different options that the schools are considering. The first being 100% on-premise, meaning students return to the physical classroom. Can you talk to me a little bit about the pros and cons of that approach? I'll let either one of you start.
I'll jump in there, and then Darak, you can add some color into that. So, yeah, in regards to, look, the number one priority of coming 100% on-prem is that it would be the safe aspect of it. So what are we doing to protect? What are we doing to create cleanliness and those types of challenges, right, that these districts would have to do? Social distancing on playgrounds, cafeterias, common areas. That's going to be, as you can imagine, really difficult to manage when you have a large body of students. And so, but the advantages is really, it's from a teaching and curriculum standpoint, it's business as usual. So it's not necessarily a major uplift for them. So that I would just share it. It would probably be the easiest in regards to, the actual fundamentals of doing business as an education facilities, right? What they're there to provide. But the challenge then comes into more of the clinical side and helping to not create a spread of the current situation. So, and that's wide range, and that is a different motion than what our education facilities have ever had to overcome, for sure. So, Darak, I don't know if you want to add your feedback.
Well, I think the reality of the situation is, nobody really knew reality until 4 months ago, and now it's getting a little closer, and what real is. But I think the reality of the situation is that schools are going to go into some type of hybrid situation, whether that's hybrid day one or totally remote day one, moving to a hybrid model, and then gradually going to an on-prem. And like Brian said, obviously the impetus of that is the security and the safety and the health of the students and the teachers that are there at the school. So, looking at the technology, looking at what needs to be done and all the check boxes that have to be checked prior to the beginning of the school year, it's inundating with just opening a regular school year. When I was a principal, it was just the list goes on and on of what you have to get done before kids show up on that day one. Now it's preparing for that situation that kids are not going to show up on that school premise on day one. And now, what do we do? How do we use the technology? How do we purchase it? How do we implement it? How do we grow it in and out, of a remote situation?
Yeah, okay. So you mentioned hybrid, which is kind of the second option that most schools are looking at. That's a mix between some portion of being on-premise and some portion being virtual. So that makes the third option kind of the opposite of that, 100% remote. Students remaining at home and connecting to the educators using some sort of technology. So talk a little bit about that. That's kind of a big difference, big change for a lot of school districts. What are the pros and cons of 100% remote?
Well, I think you have to go back and take taking a look at what you need to do as a classroom teacher and what you need to do as a student, and pushing the technology aside just for a little bit, the educational experience that a kid has in the classroom and a teacher experiences as a successful teacher, those things need to happen whether those kids are on-prem or in a remote situation. So looking at the timing of that, what do you purchase, when do you purchase it, the training piece of it, things like, you don't think about it. When you teach in a classroom, you don't think about being heard on a traditional type of setting. But with a hybrid situation or a totally remote situation, like you mentioned, David, being seen and being heard is very important.
Sure.
Kids have to hear from their students, from the student body, their fellow students, whether they're remote or in the class in a hybrid situation, or if they're all in a remote situation. They have to be able to hear themselves and hear others, and the teacher has to hear everybody, and they have to hear the teacher. And we don't look at simple things like that when you think about a traditional school day, but with remote learning at 100%, that's a big consideration, right?
Sure.
So that the learning experience is equitable, whether they're in the classroom or remote.
Okay. Now, I think each of those different options presents certainly their own challenges. But I wanted to go back to Brian's article and ask you both about 4 of the big kind of important considerations that were brought up in the article. The first one was student-centered devices. What do we mean by student-centered devices, and what should districts be thinking about when choosing student-centered devices?
Well, I mean, I think, you got to look at the use cases, right, in regards to these K-12 students. And so there's different needs at different levels. And so therefore, there's different requirements within the actual device technology. And it's really kind of honing in on the population of your students and supplying the right device to them. So, for example, in K-12, you're seeing a lot of the younger, students not necessarily need a full power laptop like your high schoolers do, right? And so there's different parameters, kind of a devices. You choose your own device in terms of the student population. So I would just share in the sense of there's different requirements within these students, and that you could have a different portfolio of devices to match the needs of the students. Okay.
Maybe based on age as well. I mean, I know I have an 8-year-old, and physical toughness of the device is kind of the primary consideration, as opposed to what are the specifications of the hard drive and whatnot.
That's exactly it. Ease of use, right? So touch screens for the younger generations, computing power differences, right, in regards to your high schoolers versus your lower K1, K2. So I would just share those are exactly the types of things that you want to be cognizant of.
Okay. So devices brings up a second thing from that article, which is connectivity. All those different options are going to require some level of connectivity. So what does it look like? What are the schools looking at to try to get these students connected?
Well, it's if I could touch base on this one, Brian, it's kind of gone through some phases, and it's interesting to see how that's happened since March to today. When in March, when everything kind of happened and the kids were pushed to home, especially where I live in Deep South Texas, low socioeconomic status of our kids, we have over 90% in that category in our local school district. So you don't have a lot of resources at home. It's just the way it is. And so school districts trying to scramble for a way to find connectivity to get to their kids, or vice versa. So hotspots became popular at the beginning. Then mobile hotspots, which putting mobile units on school buses, driving around town, that lasted just for a little while, because the feasibility of doing that in some of the school districts, especially in Texas, where we have big school districts but big geography, like lots of land mass, and it was just impossible for the bus fleet to be able to do that. And so now a lot of the schools have now adopted, as far as connectivity, is getting it to the schools in an outside environment. So they know the kids aren't going to be allowed in the school, but they're allowed on the school premise. So, and seeing that neighborhoods and schools districts, put schools in neighborhood areas where most of the kids are within a close geographic position, then we can put some internet access on the outside of those schools. Kids can walk to school if they're close, or drive there to get internet access. So that's kind of the prevailing idea right now that we're seeing with a lot of school districts in South Texas.
Okay, interesting. The next point in the article was the faculty and the staff. How are we getting them up to speed on technology, and how do we make sure that they're changing their approach to take into consideration the fact that half their students, maybe all their students, are remote now? What kind of training do you think that the districts need to look at for their faculty and staff?
Yeah, I'll jump in here a little bit. Darak talked a little about connectivity, and we're focusing on the kids, but in the state of Arizona, we have 10% of our teachers that don't also have connectivity within their homes. So it also is not just a student problem, but we also have a faculty member problem too. So just kind of, give you some context of that. But look, these teachers, they have spent many hours and years to really hone in their craft inside that classroom. And now when you go out to a technology environment working from a remote capacity, they really have to change their way of delivering curriculum, right? A message or a lesson plan. So, and what I see is really more of how do you adopt the technology, and then how do you get comfortable with use of collaboration platforms, sort of like what we're doing here, to get comfortable with that. And then file sharing, is probably a parameter. Everyone has got a different method and a system on that. So it is a big learning curve for sure, more to focus on the technology standpoint of how they can then use that as a tool for the curriculum standpoint, is what I would share. And that's a big change management that our districts are going to be facing with on these teachers to get them comfortable. And so think about not being able to conduct a meeting is going to disrupt a class or a session, and time is of essence and invaluable. And so, you got to have the right support. You got to have to be able to get that teacher enabled right away, because there's a whole classroom of kids waiting. And so it brings a whole different element of challenges to be able to support these teachers in the time of need in a different way, I guess, is what I'd share with you. So yeah, I think it is different. Most of these districts have instructional development or technology development that is catered and focused on these teachers. And they spend a lot of time making sure that they're up to speed around, hey, not only are adopting it, but are you effective in the use of the technologies that the districts are applying to these teachers?
Sure. Okay. And we talk a lot about the challenges and the changes that we're going to be seeing because of this technology. But one other thing that you mentioned I thought was really interesting was an opportunity for differentiation. Are there some opportunities to actually improve and change the learning experience? One thing we talked about earlier was reteaching.
Yeah, I think that's there's going to be, there's a lot of challenges with getting thrust into this environment, because this was not a prepared way of doing it, but there are going to be some positives coming out of this. A lot of teachers have been doing remote teaching and students with remote learning for a long time. It's just never been at a scale that it is now. But I think the teachers that will tell you that have done it for a long time, being able to use something like Cisco WebEx or any of the tools that you have for collaboration, and being able to record a lesson. Reteaching is a very important thing in schools, and especially in remote learning, because as a teacher, you feed off the interactions of your students. When you're bringing up a topic and you're teaching that, if you've taught for any length of time at all, you can look in the eyes of your kids and see if they're getting it or not getting it.
Yeah.
So you either stop what you're doing and reteach that moment, which is optimal, or if you got a few kids that just need that reteaching moments, recording and going back to it. We do it in our industry all the time, and we get used to it, being able to miss something on a call or a meeting, go back and see a recording and get the whole piece and piece everything together. And that's an important thing. I think reteaching is going to be a big thing. The other thing is going to be, I don't know, we may talk about this later as well, but back, where I grew up, snow days were awesome. because you got to be off school, Well, snow days maybe is a thing of the past, because now kids, like Brian was talking about, getting devices out into the hands of all these kids and teachers, and being home, that's not going to stop learning. And so kind of bummer for kids, but a great news for some teachers too. So there's some positives that will come out of this. It's unfortunate that I think it was going to head that direction sort of more anyway for remote learning and distance learning kind of opportunities for teachers and students, but we just got thrust into it and thrown into the pool, right? So now we're just trying to swim and make the best of it. But I think there's going to be some positives that come out of it.
So no more missing school for chicken pox. Okay.
That's right,
yeah. Home with our laptop.
Yeah, if you can get on, you're on. Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of an expectation that we'll just take what we do in the classroom and we'll just turn on, a collaboration tool like this and just start presenting to kids at home. But I don't really think that's the case. What kind of things do you think that educators need to do to think about, and preparations that they need to make if half of their class or all of their class is now virtual? You talk about all that preparation they took in, face to face in the classroom, but what kind of differences are there going to be with virtual teaching? What kind of things are they going to have to change?
Well, I think Darak makes several points through, but it's how they're going to stay engaged in a session, right? That's going to be the biggest challenge. And so, and the length of time, right? So, kids don't have the capacity to sit in a 5-hour session and go through it. So you got to look at engagement. I do believe this technology change will help personalize the learning a little bit. So I think it's more of now, how do you personalize it to the student? And I think technology offers a little bit more of that capacity, or that ability, I should say, to personalize that learning for them. So I would say those are probably the two of the biggest things there. As you know, we sit on a lot of conference calls on our environment and video calls, and and just think about an 8-year-old or 9-year-old kind of going through that same motion. And I think keeping them engaged is going to be more of a further challenge, in ways that we're going to have to get creative to help our teachers to do that for our student populations, for sure.
Sure.
And I think we've talked so much about students and teachers and school districts getting thrust into this environment without a whole lot of knowledge base for most of them. But, one of the big aspects, in education, they always teach you that accountability is a triangle, right? It's a student, it's a teacher, and it's a parent. And we don't think about the parents with this, because 100% remote learning, even though they're not directing the lesson per se, right? They're there to hopefully, and I can't imagine, when my girls were, 7, 8, 9 years old, I'm thinking, how do I keep them engaged on something like this for any extended period of time? And Brian has younger kids as well, and it's tough, so it's tough on the parents too. And so that's an aspect that we think about, but man, at 100% remote learning experience, that's a big piece of it. And so even getting the parents some documentation, not necessarily training, but at least some information on how to help, their child stay engaged on a remote session is important too.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's transition a little bit here. With remote learning and connecting remotely, you start hearing a lot about concerns over security and data privacy. We've all heard stories about districts adopting a platform and then finding out later that they didn't have adequate security. So how do we keep our students safe and our personal information safe as we're connecting remotely?
Go for it, Darak. I know you've got a lot of experience.
So that's an important aspect. We saw that usually what happens in secure atmospheres, whether it's internal security or security breaches from outside the network, those usually happen with any type of business, whether it's education, finance, whatever business we deal with at Insight. But those usually happen when you rush into a decision making, or you rush into something because you need something set in place and there's no preparation for that. And so that's kind of what happened. And we kind of, Zoom was so courteous and generous about giving their tool to some students and schools at the very beginning, which was awesome. But then we saw what happened when you don't take a look at the security over a long period of time, and things start, happening. So I think that was a good lesson for everybody to learn. I know that that tool now is a lot more secure than what it was. But others have learned from that. But the security aspect piece of it is vital. Right now, with Microsoft is making it pretty easy for school districts to have students remote in and get into the resources, even use things like Jabber, where the students can call teachers without having to call cell phones and things like that on the computer. That's invaluable for something like this. But that's a secure access layer that you have to kind of go through. And so our partners like Cisco and Microsoft and Palo Alto, they have the ability to help schools and us design systems that do that. But yeah, it's super important.
Okay, great. Now, we talk a lot about, equipping students with the devices and school districts providing connectivity and security. So that begs the obvious question, which is the financial impact of this. So how can districts, how are they going to maximize their budgets and make sure that they're allocating the money wisely and getting the most that they can for their investment? How can they afford all of this?
Yeah, good question. And a lot of districts are struggling with that, quite frankly. And so this is why that CARES Act that's coming from the Trump administration is very important for these states and these districts, and looking at programs like E-rate and trying to leverage federal funds and grants. There's a lot of activity and focus around looking at other funding programs to aid the immediate cash flow to go and support more of a technology spend in these K-12. So it is definitely a big challenge, and they are definitely trying to spend their money wisely, to your point, David, without a doubt. And K-12 has been very good about that is part of their DNA, where they try to stretch their dollar out as far as it can go, I would say, generally speaking. And now that pressure and that demand on them is even heightened, because we're not talking about 5 to 10 devices for students. They're talking about thousands and per districts, right? Or a large percentage of their student population now needing some type of digital device or connectivity, for that matter. And so it is creating a financial challenge for them, for sure. And what I kind of see is they're just reappropriating budgets, and where they're decreasing, they're moving over to technology for increased spend. And then they're heavily waiting on this CARES Act and kind of seeing what the impact of that is to their local districts, is what I would share. Those are kind of the two major things I see.
Okay.
I think to kind of add to what Brian said, I'm seeing that too with my customers. There's two other things and two other words that keep popping up with these purchases, and are really important. One thing is something called sustainability. So whenever you apply for a grant, they ask you about that. Like, if we give you these funds and you purchase these things, what in-kind contributions is your district going to have to sustain that, to keep them going, to keep the maintenance on the devices going, to pay the subscriptions that you have now for security, next year, when hopefully we're back to a more traditional school setting, but they still have these tools, and they're still going to have remote students and remote learning, and they're still going to need them, right? How are they going to continue to pay for them? That's a big thing, and that we're getting that question from our customers a lot. Like, okay, I know this is what it's cost this year, but what's my renewal cost and my subscription cost next year? How does that play into my budget? And with that, they're trying to, budget officers are trying to look at their capital outlay budget, which is most of these purchases, because they don't have this equipment right now, so it's all capital outlay. But how do I move that into more of an operational budget, where I can budget that on a year-to-year basis for something that I already have? The school districts all have operational budgets for things like leasing fax machines and copy machines and other things they do. How do I move this technology into that? Because technology has always traditionally been a capital outlay purchase. Like, I need a bunch of laptops, but I don't need a bunch of laptops next year, right? So that's a capital outlay. But the repairs and things are going to get old, and how do I keep up that? That's important, because I've seen just in South Texas area, some school districts that have purchased a lot of equipment from grants and things like that. But within 3 years, when they start being repaired or replaced, they don't have the funds to keep it going, and so it dies out. So sustainability is massively important when it comes to times like this.
Okay. And are there options for, you mentioned leasing, but is there options for like subscriptions or managed services type of things for the devices?
Yeah, so most of the security manufacturers now, people like the Cisco and Palo Alto, they make a lot of hardware, but they're wanting their customers to go to more of a subscription-based model as well, more of software defined networks rather than such hardware, centric kind of stuff. So yeah, everybody from Microsoft to all the major manufacturers that deal with security and technology are now offering that to help people move that into more of an operational budget so they can keep things rolling and keep it going year after year. So not just the freshmen this year and enjoy that, but when they're seniors, they enjoy it as well, right?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So one question that I have is, we're dealing with a current situation, this pandemic, but schools certainly have to look a little bit beyond that. What kind of recommendations are you giving to your clients about setting a plan or a roadmap for not just getting through this crisis, but the next 5 years? Because we just don't know what's going to change. We don't know what the future looks like. So how do you help them create a roadmap to make sure that they can adjust to whatever comes down the road?
You want to tackle that one, Brian? Well, I can tackle it. I think the one thing that we've done, and school districts now.
Yep. So, at Insight, that's part of our trusted advisor.
I think, Brian, we were having some connectivity issues there with you.
You want me to take it? I'll take the question.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Yeah, I think school districts and higher ed and people that they've gotten federal funds, in the past, or grants or anything like that. They all have technology plans. So 3 to 5 year technology plans is a norm. They all have those, right? So that's going to be their roadmap, if you will, to take them down the road. Like, these are the things that I need to have that we decided in our district that is important to our students and our teachers to keep our education equitable, to keep it top notch, to keep our kids learning in a strong learning environment. So this is what we're going to need to do. And those roadmaps pretty much are already set. I mean, some of them are very general and some of them are very specific, but there is a roadmap there that helps guide them, like you said, David, down for that question, down the path of, okay, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do next, right? More of a technology plan with type of a scope and sequence attached to it. So they have a timing mechanism with it. They have those, and they're fantastic to have. Every school district, I'm sure, has one of those that takes them down that next path.
Okay, great. Well, we've covered a lot of great information here. I wanted to just kind of end off with a kind of an open-ended question to you. Do you think have we established a new normal? Is this what school districts are going to look like? Maybe this hybrid approach going forward, or what do you think the future looks like? Just in your opinion, not based on any, empirical data, but on your experience.
Technical difficulties, but I think that traditional school concept, what we normally think of a traditional school, kids go to school and they go Monday through Friday and, 5 days a week, and they're off in the summer, right? People have been pushing against that traditional model for a long time. Last 20 years or so, people have gone to different scheduling. They've gone to year-round school, AB schedule, which is kind of what people are looking at right now with this hybrid kind of deal. So they've always been pushing the parameters of what traditional school looks like. And there's been a ton of school districts that have a lot of success with moving their model a little bit away from a more traditional. I think it's always been kind of moving that way. We just kind of got thrust into this thing because of this virus, and now it just shoved us into the lake, and so now it's swim or sink. And so I think that's what's kind of motivating. But I think that traditional model has been kind of pushed against for a long time, and it's good. People rethink and think outside the box. Every kid learns different. Every teacher teaches different. Success for one kid is very different than success for another. And so I think it's good that's another good thing that's coming down with us rethinking how we're teaching. It was gonna happen anyway. Remote and distance learning was happening anyway with the higher education classes, with AP classes and things like that. So I think it's a good thing, and I think it's a positive thing.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. And that's our time for today. So, Darak, I want to thank you for being with us. It looks like Brian was able to jump back in. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate your time. And that's our session for today. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll speak with you soon.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.